Before the Book of Mormon was even published, critics were already trying to discredit its veracity. A guy with the pseudonym Obadiah Dogberry had a newspaper called The Reflector, and it printed out of the same shop that the Book of Mormon was being printed out of. And he actually stole excerpts of the Book of Mormon before it was published and published it in his newspaper. And with that, making defamatory claims towards Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, claiming it all to be one pious fraud. But with today's technology, those claims of pious fraudulence go much farther than they did in 1830. With the internet, YouTube, and steel print books, the controversy of the Book of Mormon continues. But among all these things in recent years, one document has stood forth among the rest, critiquing the Book of Mormon. And that is
the CES Letter.
The CES.
The CES, that's it.
The CES Letter.
The CES Letter.
CES Letter, somewhere between 13 and 15,000 people have reached out to Jeremy personally.
Welcome to the second episode of our series investigating the CES Letter. So today we're going to be addressing a claim in the CES Letter where Jeremy Runnels says that there are 14 mistranslations in the Book of Mormon that are unique to the King James Version of the Bible, suggesting that Joseph Smith was just copying the King James Version of the Bible instead of translating an ancient record. So I have this list right here. We have spent hours and hours studying this and diving into it, and so we're going to share what we have found so far. So stick with me as I go through each one of the points, and we're going to see if this claim really holds water. Let's get into it. Okay, as I said earlier, we're going to dive into the 1769 KJV errors. So this part in the CES Letter actually comes before the 17th century italics that we covered last time, but we wanted to give it its due diligence. So to start off, you read, it says 1769 KJV errors. What are 1769 King James Version edition errors doing in the Book of Mormon? A purported ancient text. Errors which are unique to the 1769 edition that Joseph Smith owned. Okay, so there's two claims here. The first one is that there are errors. So that whatever he points out in the next part, that we have to verify whether or not they truly are errors. And then the second part is that they are unique to the 1769 edition that Joseph Smith owned. And so those are the two claims that we're going to be diving into. So you got to go and click on it. And then what shows up are these two quotes. Now, for the sake of time and not making this super boring, I'm going to summarize them, but I highly recommend you go and read the quotes yourselves, right? So the first one is from Fair Mormon, which is a faithful LDS site, and they say essentially that they have no explanation or no reason why certain Bible passages match the King James Version and show up in the Book of Mormon as well. The second one is a longer one, and it's from someone named Stan Larson. He is a critic of the church, and he essentially just talks about, the Sermon on the Mount shows up almost verbatim in the Book of Mormon, but it doesn't show up verbatim. There are things deleted, revised, or added to the text. And why is this? This shouldn't be this way. That's kind of his main claim. But we are going to look at the claim itself, because next you see this graph, and this graph looks very well put together. As you can see, in the far left column is the reference in the King James Version of the Bible. Then in the next column it has the Book of Mormon reference. On the far right, it shows how they match, right? And it has the parts that he's talking about that are errors are bolded. And then in this column, it has the correct translation, what the bolded part in those verses should really say. So what I'm going to do is break down every single one of these. I'm going to cross-reference each of these with the original Hebrew. We're going to see if these really are errors and if they are unique to the King James Version of the Bible that Joseph Smith would have had. So let's do it. Now, a great tool that I always use, and I highly recommend to all of you who like to do research on the Bible, the Book of Mormon, anything, is BibleHub.com. Now, at the end of the day, I have never studied Hebrew and Greek in depth. I do not speak them. And so I just want to say I'm doing my research the best that I can without that background, all right? So the first one, let's go, it's Isaiah 2:9, and the verses that it talks about, and I'll just read it, says, "And the mean man," bolded part, "boweth down, and the great man humbleth himself not. Therefore forgive them not." The first thing that he points out is that boweth down should be not down. So I think maybe either what he's saying is the translation should be, "And the mean man boweth not down, and the great man humbleth himself not." And so let's take a look and see what the other translations. So the first thing that I'm noticing is that there are variations. So one of them, the common man hath been humbled. So humbled, bowed down is commonly used, brought low, bowed down. But let's look at a version of the Bible that I think is going to hold a lot of weight as we do this, and it's the Literal Standard Version. Just for reference, the Literal Standard Version of the Bible was published first in February of 2020. So it's a new translation. And as it says here on Wikipedia, the Literal Standard Version is a modern English translation of the Bible with a number of distinctive features. It describes itself as the most literal translation of the Bible into the modern English language. The first edition was published February 2nd, 2020. So this is a new translation, and it's supposed to be the most literal translation. And the Literal Standard Version of it says this: "And the low bows down, and the high is humbled, and you do not accept them." So once again, it says bows down. So starting with this first one, I'm really confused because I'm not seeing any translation of the Bible that is saying boweth not down or something like that. So I don't know if this just isn't clear or if I'm not understanding it correctly, but this first one doesn't make any sense. So let's go into the second one. It's in Isaiah 2:16, and this is how it reads in the King James Version. "And upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all pleasant pictures." Now, one thing to point out here that's really interesting and actually plays into the veracity of the Book of Mormon, this bracketed part right here that says, "and upon all the ships of the sea, and upon all the ships of Tarshish." Upon all the ships of the sea doesn't show up in the King James Version of the Bible. But in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, it actually says upon all the ships of the sea. So the Book of Mormon actually includes both upon all the ships of the sea and upon all the ships of Tarshish, which a lot of people theorize means it's a more complete translation of what it was originally. In the Septuagint or the Masoretic texts don't have the fullness, but they each have one half of a whole. So that's actually really good evidence for the Book of Mormon, but that has nothing to do with what we're looking into right now. So right here it says that pictures should not be used, but it should be image, ships, or craft. So first thing that I'm looking at here is image. That's the first correct definition that he gives. But what's the difference between image and picture? I just don't really understand. They're different words that explain the same ideas. So with that, let's look into it though. So yeah, I'm looking, there are some that say craft, vessel. American Standard Version says imagery, ship, boat. Imagery again with the English Revised Version, imagery again with this version. So let's look at the Literal Standard Version, and it says, "For all the ships of Tarshish and for all desirable pictures." So once again, the Literal Standard Version uses what the KJV uses. Already with these first two, I'm extremely confused, and I don't understand if Jeremy did the research himself or if he didn't check the research, but the very first two are not what he says at all. In fact, it's the exact opposite. These are both correct translation, and the Literal Standard Version of the Bible corroborates that. On to the next one, Isaiah 3:2. So then it says, "The mighty man and the man of war, the judge, the prophet, the prudent, and the ancient." What it's saying is it should be soothsayer instead of prudent. So let's take a look at Bible Hub. Okay, so as I'm looking right here, it's saying like the diviner, I think it's diviner, not diviner, I'm not sure. Diviner, fortune teller, the soothsayer. It looks like here, first off, that there's multiple potential correct translations, not just soothsayer, but there's the diviner and there's the fortune teller. So let's look in, I want to understand a little bit more what these words mean, both prudent, soothsayer, and diviner, because I think that's really important. So first off, in Bible Hub, we'll click on here, and that takes us to the Hebrew. And then we're able to look at each of the words and what they're translated as. And the thing that's cool is you can actually click on it. So this Strong's 7080 just represents that word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance. So I click on that, and it will take us here. So let's look and see what the definition of this word is. To practice divination. To practice divination. All right, looks like we need to figure out what divination is. So we'll pull up a definition from Joseph Smith's time. Let's go Webster Dictionary 1828. One who professes divination, one who pretends to predict events. So this one's interesting because it says one who pretends to predict events. And one of the main translations that we saw before was a fortune teller. So someone who can like tell the future. Let's look at what soothsayer is. A fortune teller, a foreteller. So soothsayer and diviner, it's like someone who tells the future, right? Now let's look up the word for prudent from Joseph Smith's dictionary. Circumspect, practically wise, careful of the consequences, measures action, caution. Foreseeing by instinct. Interesting. Okay, so right here we're seeing that one of the definitions of prudent at the time of Joseph Smith is to be able to foresee by instinct. Once again, we look at this and he's saying that the correct translation is soothsayer. But then we see the word prudent is here. And the second definition, so a definition of the word prudent at the time of Joseph Smith especially, is someone who can foresee the future by instinct. Okay, while I'm editing this, I want to make an even stronger case because I use the 1828 dictionary, but as I point out later, Joseph Smith is clearly translating the Book of Mormon into early modern English, or the same type of English that the King James Version was translated into. So I wanted to go back even farther and understand the root of the word prudent, and this is what I found, that it's from Middle English prudent, and then it says the French and the Latin version, and it's contracted from providence, I don't know if that's how you say it, which means foresight. The past participle of provideo, I foresee. Baked into the very root of the word prudent is the definition of soothsayer and diviner. And so with this, we clearly see that this is not an incorrect translation, but a correct variant of translation. Okay, before I continue, one thing I want to point out is critics are going to be like, okay, well, yes, what you are saying may be right, but isn't it interesting that all of these translations just happen to match with the King James Version of the Bible? I guess what I would say to that is that it's obvious that the Book of Mormon is translated from its original language to a language that is similar to the King James Version of the Bible. And that language is known as Early Modern English. So with this in mind, you would expect little to no variation in similar verses in the Book of Mormon and the King James Version of the Bible, because many of the variations in other translations of the Bible that we are pointing out here happen as English itself evolves. So because the Book of Mormon is translated to that early modern English style of writing, you would expect there to be pretty strict uniformity between that and the King James Version, which uses that same style of language. All right, let's get back to it. On to the next one. And it's just the very next verse in Isaiah 3:3. The captain of 50 and the honorable man and the counselor, and the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator. So what it's saying is that the word eloquent orator should be enchanter, okay? So as I'm looking through, yes, most of the definitions are enchanter. Then the King James Version says eloquent orator. It says expert in charms is the English Standard Version. Let's look at what the literal Standard Version says. The wise craftsman and the discerning charmer. So like, yeah, the charmer. Well, let's look at Strong's Hebrew Concordance and see kind of what this word is. Okay, so being charmed, orator, enchanter, amulets, whisper, prayer. Yeah, it's interesting. This is how Hebrew is. And I don't understand Hebrew super well, and I'm not pretending that I do, but that's the thing that's crazy about this language from what I see is there's so many definitions of it, and they seem to use Hebrew words in a way where it can mean that it makes sense in all of those different ways. And so that's what makes it hard translating into English, is because they also do these puns, and the puns don't translate in English. They just make sense in Hebrew. And so then it's like, okay, well, which one of these definitions of this Hebrew word am I going to translate to English? Because all of them could technically be correct and represent one part of that pun. But, you know, that's one of the things that's hard. So it says that the definition of this Hebrew word means a whispering, charming, charmed, enchanter, whisper, amulets. So I guess my initial instinct is probably where I'm going to end up on this one too, is that someone who's charming, or an enchanter or charmer, and an eloquent orator, like it's just a different way of saying someone who is charming. That one is probably the strongest case that I've seen so far, that it's incorrect. But one thing that you would expect, in the way that it seems like it's represented, is that there's the incorrect translation and the correct, where As you can see, these are all very much interrelated. All right, let's start moving a little bit quicker. This next one, Isaiah 5:2, it says, and he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof, planted it, and talks about how he's building a vineyard, right? And it's saying the proper way of translating it is dug it up. All right, let's go to it. It's Isaiah 5:2. And he dug it up, he plowed the land, he dug it up, he made a hedge around it. Let's look at the literal translation, the most recent one. And he fences it and casts out its stones. So the literal translation coincides with that, so it doesn't seem like it's an incorrect translation. So once again, I don't really know what Jeremy's getting at because this just isn't true what he's saying. This isn't an incorrect translation. All right, so this next one, this one is interesting. We're not gonna spend a ton of time diving into this. Seraphim is the plural of seraph. And seraph is a mythological creature. It's like a fiery flying serpent, kind of like a dragon, maybe is one way you can think about it. The context of each of these verses, it's talking about more than one of these mythological creatures. And so in English, we add an S at the end of things a lot of times to show that they are plural. And so in this case, there's an S at the end, which is just incorrect grammar. So this is more of like a grammar thing. The idea that they make that same mistake in the translation, whether it was on Joseph's side or on Oliver Cowdery's side, I don't know. It's just not that crazy. So let's move on to the next one. And this one is Isaiah 9:1, which we should recognize from our first video that we did because this was one of the ones that has italicized words that were supposedly copied from the King James Bible, but we went through that. And what he points out here that the mistranslation is where it says grievously afflict her, by the way. So it's saying that it shouldn't be grievously afflict, but honor. Let's take a look at what the other translations say. So I'm seeing, yes, honor, glory, glorious. And then we'll go to the literal standard version once again. And this one says honored, by the way, this scene. So this is the first one that actually looks like it might be what it is. So let's look into it though. We'll look into the actual word and what its etymology is. What we're seeing is grievous, grave, dim, heavy, heavier, hardened. So as you see, once again, Hebrew's interesting this way. Like there's all these what seem like unrelated definitions to these Hebrew words. Now let's look at the actual definition of it in Hebrew, in Strong's Hebrew Concordance. And as you can see, it says to be heavy, weighty, or burdensome. Interesting. So as you look back, it says grievously afflict. And so once again, you have the definition heavy, weighty, or burdensome. Burdensome or grievously afflict are the same thing. Now, as we saw though, a lot of the translations chose to go a different route in terms of saying honor or glorify or something like that. But who's to say who is right? And in this case, if the word was completely, like there was no definition associated with that word that seemed to match grievously afflict, then I would see this as a huge problem. But that isn't the case. And so who's to say that the Book of Mormon and the King James Version aren't the ones who actually have the closer translation to what Isaiah meant when he wrote it? All right, on to the next one. We have Isaiah 10:18. And right here it's saying, and shall consume the glory of his forest and his fruitful field, both soul and body, and they shall be as when a standard bearer fainteth. What he's saying here is that should be translated to sick man instead of standard bearer, which that would be a problem I would see because I don't really see how those could mean the same thing. Okay, let's look at the literal standard version once again, which is going to be like our main thing that we look at. And the literal standard version uses standard bearer. So it says he fainteth of a standard bearer. Move on to the next one. Isaiah 11:3. In the King James Version and Book of Mormon, it says, and shall make him of a quick understanding in fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes. So a quick understanding should be translated to delight according to this chart. So a lot of them, yep, they're all saying delight. When you click on the actual definition of the word can mean accept, smell, touch, make of quick understanding. Okay, so once again, you look at the word and this isn't a situation where it's like, oh, this is a complete incorrect translation of what this word should be. But one of the definitions of the word that's used is of a quick understanding, to make a quick understanding. This just comes into one of those situations of what did Isaiah truly mean?
All right, guys, I'm actually editing this on an airplane on the way to DC for a video for the Stick of Joseph, and I'm just getting bored editing it. I know you might be getting bored watching it, and so If you want to watch the last 4 words that we go through, you can go to the link in the description. There's an unlisted video, and you can see those last 4 words and how I break them down. It's just the same thing, and I go through 4 more words, but it's pretty much the same answer. But for the sake of making this video not so boring and redundant, I'm just going to end it here. And for those who are interested, you can do that in the description.
Now let me give you my final thoughts. All right, so in conclusion, I'd really like to have a conversation with Jeremy Runnels. And so please, if you see this, reach out to me. I want to talk to you because I'm genuinely confused on why you would include this in the CES letter, because it's not what it claims to be. Now, as I pointed out, there's a couple of them that seem pretty close, but even those, saying that it's an incorrect translation seems like a stretch instead of just calling it a variation in translation. And so I'm just genuinely concerned, first off, because this is presented as fact, and most people are going to look at this list and they're just going to take it as fact because it looks so well researched. It's very well organized, and it's just presented as matter of fact. But as you can tell, when you look into it, it isn't what it says it is. And that's very concerning. And so I would ask Jeremy, I'd love to talk to you about this. Is it possible that I'm stupid and I'm completely misrepresenting and misunderstanding what you're trying to say with this? That is definitely a possibility. And if that's the case, please let me know. But for everyone watching, I hope that we all learn this lesson, that if the information is coming from, a pro LDS source or a critical LDS source, we should do our own research. Don't just take everything at face value. Look into it yourself. The reason why this is so important is because I believe we're dealing with eternity here. Our faith and belief will project how the rest of our life goes. So this is a really important question and requires a lot of hours and praying and reading and pondering on these things in order to find the truth. And so that's my ask to everyone watching, is do that yourself. If you are looking into the CES letter, then continue to look into the CES letter, but don't just look into the CES letter. Also give ear to the scriptures themselves. Read the Book of Mormon itself as you're reading the CES letter. Read arguments for the Book of Mormon as well. And that is how we're going to get a more clear vision of what the truth is. And with that, I just say stay curious and hungry, and we'll see you on the next episode of Investigating the CES Letter.